which we should talk about. Like, what is the Banksy standard?
I mean, I'm curious as well. Like, what were people expecting of Banksy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess something, tartar, something more clever.
I think that the thing for me is that in the past, his works have usually had a pretty precise political commentary. I'm Kate Brown, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from Artnet News. So we are back with our monthly roundup where we talk through some of the big stories that are making waves in the art world. Today, I'm joined by co-host Ben Davis. Hey, Ben, how's it going?
Hello, Kate.
And we have with us today our art and pop culture editor, Chen. Min, hey, it's so great to have you on the podcast and on the roundup finally.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
You commission and edit a lot of our news coverage, and a bunch of the stories that we're going to be talking about today, you had a hand in. So I'm really looking forward to your takes in particular. So it's August, and despite the fact that this is supposed to be the month where art and culture tends to gear down and the professional art world goes to Greece and all these other beautiful islands and the Hamptons, I find increasingly with every passing summer that we are not quiet around here and the news doesn't really stop. So yeah, there's a bunch of happenings this summer that we can go through. So we picked out a few big ones. We're going to talk about an abruptly halted auction of artworks made by Michael Jackson, allegedly. The art stories on both sides of a prisoner exchange that occurred this month between Russia and the West. And then finally, the artist who just can't quit, Banksy. He dropped 9 animal-themed art pieces this month around London. And some are wondering if the world's most famous street artist has slightly lost his touch. So I'm curious what you guys think about that. But before we get into all of it, maybe we should just talk about what we're doing next month because it is August, but it is almost Labor Day, which means everybody's about to get really busy. So I'm curious what's on your radar in and around New York.
Well, I'm looking forward, although slightly dreading, because like you said, August has been busy enough and September gets busier. So I'm looking forward to a couple things coming up. I've got on my must-see list the Elizabeth Catlett show opening at the Brooklyn Museum. I think she's a really amazing artist. And some years ago, I saw a show by her and I thought it was just a revelation. I'm looking forward to this show a lot. I think it'll be bigger. It'll have more historical work. She's such an interesting artist. And then at the Met, there's a show on Sienese painting, the birth of the Renaissance in Siena. And I think that should be a blockbuster. There's some amazing stuff in that show. There's even a Duccio painting, Madonna and Child, in that show that infamously the Met paid $45 million for in 2006. It was kind of a controversy at that time. So almost kind of unfathomable, that kind of outlay now, given where the museum world is at. But all the backstage gossip aside, I think that's an amazing period of art. I think it's going to be a really hot show.
I was just in Siena this summer, actually, and it's like the first place that a bank was ever open. So I feel like banking and art having close ties throughout the millennia. That'll be a rich show. Yeah, Min, what are you interested in next month?
A report from the banking room, at the show. Kate.
Amazing. Amongst the many shows opening next month, really looking forward to the Robert Frank show that's launching at the MoMA.
Oh, wow.
Which sounds massive. It's going to be more than 200 objects on view, which, it's only appropriate for an artist with such a sprawling career in photography and filmmaking.
For sure.
I love The Americans. I love his work with the Rolling Stones, so really can't wait to see this one.
The Americans, another one of my all-time favorite works of art. Gives me chills every time I look at that photo collection.
100%. And I have another one that I'm looking forward to, which is not in New York, but it's the Ralph Steadman retrospective that's opening in Washington, D.C. The show was delayed by COVID, so this is long awaited, long overdue. And of course, I'm familiar with his work from reading Hunter S. Thompson as a young journalist, but the show is supposed to explore other aspects of his practice. Besides his political cartoons, there's going to be his sculptures, his illustrations for children's books. 100%. Cannot wait to see this one.
Yeah, he's definitely an artist who deserves a real museum retrospective, because I think sometimes those cartoonists get overlooked, I feel like I saw his work for the first time on a dorm room wall or something and never really thought that much about it, but he's such a prolific political commentator too. That'll be
really defined a style and a look and a period, and someone with real crossover appeal kind of a household name or a semi-household name, but still a lot of cred, I feel like. I mean, I think that's the connection to the counterculture or whatever. And Hunter S. Thompson, definitely a show to watch. Kate, what about you?
Over in Berlin, we have Berlin Art Week, which is opening, I think, exactly the same week as Armory Week will be. So I'll be chasing around the city. It's like all the commercial galleries and museums open shows and have events and, artists dancing inside and outside. So it'll be fun. There's a Danielle McKinney show. She makes beautiful paintings at Max Hetzler that I'm really excited to see. I saw her work at Frieze London, I think it was last year, and I think it's going to be taking over a few of their spaces. So it'll be nice to see a lot more of those paintings. And other than that, I'm interested in kind of a weird project that I just heard about today, which is called the 50 for Berlin Swimming Pool Project. The short of it is that there's this like canal that runs through the capital, and they're trying to, very much in the spirit of the Olympics, like make it swimmable again. It's kind of this rewilding project.
Well, hopefully not exactly in the spirit of the Olympics. It's people still got pink eye or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But they've been working on this for a while, and it's very far from realized, but it's this very like utopian project that Berliners have become obsessed with. Like the swimming spot will, if it ever happens, be near my house. So there's going to be this big auction, like Wolfgang Tillmans is selling work. They want to like do research about the water quality. So, I'm going to go check it out. I won't be bidding, but I'm interested.
Cool. Well,
Easy.
I am sure that Berlin being Berlin, there'll be some dancing there too. People will be splashing around to the beat.
Yeah, so let's get into the news of the month. Min, do you want to take us through this Michael Jackson auction that I believe got totally called off?
So we learned late last month, early this month, that a collection of 76 artworks by the late king of pop, Michael Jackson, was going up for sale, allegedly by him. Kate and Ben, did you get a chance to see the works?
I had a look. They're derivative in some cases. There's like a Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a weird vibe emanating from these artworks. I mean, irrespective of your good or bad feelings about Michael Jackson, this is kind of weird vibe off of these, what do you call them, Min, sketches?
They're drawings. They're watercolor and colored pencil drawings. So they depict U.S. presidents, dreamy sort of vignettes. There's a drawing of Michelangelo's David, a drawing of Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and some of them are drawn on presidential notepaper for some reason, which Michael Jackson apparently received when he visited Reagan in the 80s.
Such a flex.
It is such a flex.
Yeah.
So what's interesting to us was the auction was court mandated, which is just strange. So why is the court compelling this sale? And where is this art from? The auction description also very clearly stated that the sale had nothing to do with the estate. So why is the estate distancing itself from the auction? So our intrepid reporter Adam Schrader actually went down quite a rabbit hole to unpack this. Very basically, the party being compelled by a court to sell the collection is called the Jackson Strong Alliance, which is a partnership between Michael Jackson and this Australian artist named Brett Livingstone Strong. Does it ring a bell?
No, not an artist I know outside of this, although I understand he is the only artist to have done a live portrait of Michael Jackson. Is that right?
Yes, he, in 1990, painted the only portrait that Michael Jackson has ever sat for. Interesting story behind that portrait, too.
Yeah, there's a lot in this story.
It's not in this trove of 76 pieces that are at issue.
No, this trove is strictly works allegedly by Michael Jackson. According to Strong, he and Jackson had this really creative partnership that began after they met in 1979. Strong said he was mentoring and encouraging the singer in visual art. Jackson apparently sought Strong's advice in matters of art. And it's during this partnership that Jackson created this collection of art, which Strong also claims that Jackson gave him all the copyrights to the art right before Jackson died in 2008. So this sale was being mandated because the Jackson Strong Alliance owes money to a bunch of creditors. Among them is Vincent Investments, which is the largest creditor. It's an investment firm. And Cher, who...
Cher pop star.
The pop star.
Yes, to be clear, yeah.
Cher Allman, just to use her full name. She's apparently owed $1 million. So we should also come out and say that the Jackson estate has made it clear that they have concerns that these works are not by Michael Jackson, and they've relayed those concerns to the auction house. They basically said, buyer beware. But just before the sale was going to go ahead on August 3rd, at the very last minute, Jackson Strong Alliance filed for bankruptcy, so it effectively halted the auction. And if you go to the website now, to the auction listing, the auction house is basically selling this giant throne that was featured in the Billboard Awards. They had a hologram Michael Jackson dancing in front of it.
Yeah, because that was a separate lot. That was Michael Jackson memorabilia that was not a part of this particular trove. And I actually looked at this just before we got here, and that lot passed. I think they went ahead selling the throne and no takers.
Really?
I will add here that this is not the end of the story. And our market reporter, Eileen Kinsella, is actually still pulling on some threads here. And there may be more developments. So stay tuned.
Okay. So Brett Livingston Strong, basically, it sounds like pulled out, made a bankruptcy claim right before the sale to try to hold on to this collection for longer and not have to pay these creditors that he owes a bunch of money to.
Yeah, his contention is that the sale is going to destroy the value of these works, which are done by Michael Jackson, allegedly. And I get the sense that he feels that what the price tag on these works are just too low, and he would prefer to hang on to them for sure.
Well, there was something weird about that too, because I was reading that the lot was like a single lot at first, like they were going to sell all of it for $1 million, and then if that passed, they were then going to like break it into piecemeal and sell it for like, what was it, $9,999? Is this, what's the auction house? And we should mention it. It's King's, right?
Yeah, it's King's Auction, and it's quite unique. I've never seen an auction format like this. It just seems like they were really ready to just get rid of the works.
Yeah, it's a Las Vegas auction house. It's not one of the big auction houses. Just an odd story, like from every direction, like an odd painter, odd artwork, odd auction arrangement, odd financial shenanigans, and an odd outcome in the sense that at the very last moment, eyes were on the sale and the rug got yanked out from under it. And I don't really know what to make of it because he was being compelled by the court to sell off these artworks to service these debts. Clearly didn't want to, but also the Jackson estate, as you said, had been clear that we're not willing to authenticate these things. So there's this huge question mark over it, which selling them would have rendered those concerns even more active and live, because you kind of run into fraud territory. There's just a bad vibe over this whole thing.
Yeah, I got a very super sketchy vibe. What more can I say? But I think there is still that allure to do with Michael Jackson. I mean, he's 100% a problematic individual, but still, it's remarkable the prices his name can still fetch at auction.
And also just the estate scandals and debates that still go. I mean, I think that there was another litigation or dispute between his mother and his son and the estate over the re-release of a bunch of his albums. So it just seems like there's so much money in his legacy that people are paying off debts with and fighting over forevermore.
Yeah, and these estate disputes, it's happening with the Elvis estate as well. I mean, they're fraud allegedly circulating on the market. So, anytime there's a lot of money involved, a lot of stakeholders, I feel it's going to get into really, really tricky territory for sure.
Yeah, and there was so much weird stuff going on in the latter part of Michael Jackson's life and strange hangers-on and so on. What this is. Man, this is really strange story about this painter, and you alluded to it before, so you should just go ahead and say about this strange portrait of Michael Jackson.
This is one of the favorite things I learned during this reporting. Like I said, in 1990, Strong created this portrait of Jackson called The Book. Again, the only portrait that Michael Jackson ever sat for, and it was commissioned apparently by a Japanese firm called Hiromichi Seiki. They paid $2.1 million for the portrait, and it was hailed at that time as the most valuable portrait of a living person. And the story goes that after the Japanese firm went bust, the portrait somehow ended up in the hands of two toy inventors. In 1992, they received this painting, and they kept it in storage for 17 years in New Jersey. And in 2008, when Michael Jackson died, they decided to put it on view in an effort to sell it, and they exhibited it in a car showroom in Harlem. So
It's just, it keeps getting weirder every sentence that you say.
I know. And so there's no word. I don't know if they actually tried to sell it. I would love to track down its current whereabouts. No idea. But the life of this painting is just so fascinating. It just never ends.
Can you say briefly what it looks like?
So Jackson is pictured in like a red jacket, velvet jacket apparently. He's supposedly depicted as a modern Renaissance man. That's a quote from someone. I believe it must be strong. It's, again, very dreamy, and he's sitting apparently in Neverland. It's quite kitschy.
It's Neverland realism is what it is. And it's just like I said, every odd thing that you can imagine is in this story. And as I understand it from some of our reporting, Strong tried to sell this collection before and to an undisclosed buyer, according to Artnet News, for $87.7 million without the knowledge of the Jackson estate. Lawyers for the singer's family attempted to block the sale, the publication reported, and it appears to have not gone ahead. That was in 2011, predating this. So there's this whole history of like just dodgy dealings around this trove. And yeah, I guess I can imagine that if he thought he had someone on the hook for $87 million 15 years ago, that selling the whole thing for $1 million, or a large portion of the same trove of art for $1 million to pay off his creditors must have been a bitter pill to swallow. But who knows what is going on with this? I mean, if it's emblematic of anything, it's just how weird things get 2 layers down in the art market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I feel like some of these backroom conversations have been shrouded in mystery. Speaking of mysterious dealings of a very different nature, I think we should turn to a really big story that transpired over the summer, but which I understand was in the works for many years, a prisoner exchange, which might not naturally bring up the art world, but in this case it does on both sides of the exchange between Russia and the West. So let's get into that one, Ben.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is a much more serious story in the sense that it comes out of what has been described as the largest prisoner swap since the Cold War between Russia and the United States. But I think, to be honest, as serious as that is, some of why this story gets traction is because it does kind of have some pop culture, like some spy novel energy going through it that makes the story fascinating to people. So there was a whole bunch of prisoners who were exchanged, including some really consequential ones like journalists. I think there's an assassin in there. But one of the prisoners who went back to Russia, Anna Doltseva, is a spy who was undercover as an Argentine art dealer. She went by the name Maria Rosa Meyer Munoz. I believe that's Munoz, not Munoz. And she ran an art gallery called 514 Gallery in Ljubljana.
Which is in
Slovenia. I'll just read from the New York Times reporting on it. The online gallery was a front for Russian intelligence, part of an elaborate network of deep cover sleeper spies trained to impersonate Argentines, Brazilians, and other foreign nationals by Russia's Foreign Intelligence Agency, the SVR, around Europe. They were real-life versions of the fictional stars of The Americans, a television series inspired by the 2010 arrest of a ring of actual Russian secret agents. There was a tip-off from British intelligence, I believe, that these people were spies. People don't seem to know exactly what they did. They may have been serving as a channel to fund Russian operations in Europe. And the most amusing thing from our point of view is that one of the tip-offs that something was not right is that this gallery was just so bad and made so little money that it didn't really make sense as a business in any real way. Although I suppose, if you charged every money-losing art gallery with espionage, you would fill several transport planes back to Russia.
I'll never look at a bad booth at a fair the same way ever again. This is just a crazy story. I mean, also, Slovenia, which is a country in Europe with just over 2 million people, that this would be like the place of choice. I mean, I guess it's quite close to like Austria, which they call the gateway to the East. So it makes sense on some levels as a strategic point. But I just find it, just imagining in Slovenia, like an Argentinian dealer, like not raising eyebrows, even if she did have a good gallery, because it's just a tiny art scene,
I mean, in terms of why it does make sense, some of the reporting quotes people from the Slovenian art world saying like, it makes so little money that no one's paying attention to it. And although Slovenia is a little bit on the edge, the art cover did allow her to travel to a variety of international locations.
There was an intelligence expert who was quoted in the Times of London offering advice for like spies in terms of cover for espionage activities. He said, posing as an art dealer is just about the best possible. You're traveling, you're moving around large amounts of money, and you get to meet with influential individuals.
And you're also a little bit silly, not taken seriously. Although her husband, who is also an agent, had a, I guess, dummy tech company.
Yeah, I was looking at the Instagram of the gallery, which I believe is called 514, 5'14" or something. And their website's down, but their Instagram is still up. And yeah, they have, abstract artists, but like real painters. And I guess some of the painters found out about this when their work was just like returned to them by Slovenian authorities. But apparently they did like sell. At least one of the artists was saying that like a few paintings did sell of hers. So I guess that this spy had like contacted her on Instagram. She was like, this is for sure fake. Well, which it turned out to be, but like she did make some money in the in-between. So
yeah, fascinating.
That can't feel great.
They were posing as being from Argentina. I mean, their children speak Spanish, and apparently, according to the reporting, didn't know that their parents were foreign agents until they were returned to Russia. Like Putin is said to have greeted them at the airport saying, Buenos dias, or something like that.
Yeah, buenas noches. Yeah, that must have been a shocker. Maybe they were very good spies because their kids didn't know. They were undercover for a long time. I mean, I think one of the security commenters was quoted in the New York Times also said, like, they don't know what they were doing, or at least they're not telling us, but they had no doubt that they were, quote, very, very important. And Biden, who, when he was sick with COVID, had famously placed that call to Slovenia's prime minister to like nail down the last detail of this agreement. So I guess like these people were some of the big players that Putin wanted back, in addition to, of course, that assassin that had killed someone in Berlin in 2019.
Yeah, I guess I should mention there's another side of this story that on the other end of the trade, I mean, there are a variety of people released from Russia, and one of them that I actually wrote a little news item on was an artist named Sasha Skochelenko. It's actually sort of unbelievable, the severity of punishment she faced. She went to art school. She actually went to a program that was a joint program with BARD. Actually, BARD, I found out through this story, was the first program to be shuttered in Russia for being an undesirable international organization. So the program she went to doesn't exist. But there is a feminist group of activists that sprung up after the Ukraine war started and did a variety of creative forms of activism. Like they would put up homemade wooden crosses in different Russian cities to commemorate the dead or to mark the dead that weren't being talked about online. They would stamp Russian banknotes with anti-war messages and circulate them as a way to like circulate information despite like a media blackout on what was happening. And one of their suggestions was this kind of guerrilla propaganda, which was to print out these labels that looked like price labels, but actually had little facts about what was happening in Ukraine. And Sasha Skochelenko, I guess, saw those graphics, that idea, printed them out, and just as a sort of personal gesture of protest, she left 5 of these labels in a supermarket. Min, you have the text. You can read what some of these said.
So one of them says, Russian conscripts are being sent to Ukraine. The cost of this war is the lives of our children. Stop the war. Another one says, my great-grandfather participated in World War II for 4 years, not for Russia to become a fascist state and attack Ukraine. And another one says, the Russian army bombed an art school in Mariupol, where about 400 people were hiding from shelling.
Wow.
Yeah, and that last one about Mariupol, that was a story that got pretty widely reported on, including by Artnet News. Mm-hmm. And that last one is the particular one that got her in trouble. Immediately after the war, because there was protest inside Russia about it, they passed laws against the spreading of anything deemed to be misinformation, or what was deemed to be misinformation, including calling the war a war, subject to pretty serious punishment. So she was called in for this, I would have to say, pretty personal act of protest, and ended up getting a pretty extreme sentence, like being sent to prison for years. And This got a lot of coverage. I mean, she's a very artistic figure in prison. I mean, dressed in tie-dye with hearts on it and shirts with her own art on it. And her partner, her girlfriend, was also pretty active in building solidarity and support for her. So she became kind of an international symbol, despite the fact that her act of protest was just so small. That what is really striking about it is how disproportionate the punishment was compared to what she did. What do you guys think?
100% agree. I mean, I think the contrast you drew in your piece about how subtle and small her act of protest was, it's also almost like a piece of culture jamming. And in turn, she received like 7 years for disseminating false knowledge about the Russian armed forces, which it's tragic, it's devastating, especially she does seem like a very lovely individual as well.
For sure. There's so many layers and elements of psychological warfare and what she went through. But when the prisoner exchange happened and they were told, she thought, I think it was quoted in your story, Ben, that they're going to take us to the forest now and shoot us. It was just that level of like desperation, you know, that there's just had no hope that anything was ever going to work out.
Honestly, one of the not funny exactly, but I don't know, ironic. It's not just that it was a small act. It's that the reason she got in trouble, like it was this very personal thing. She's sort of self-motivated, decided to do something that would kind of like be a moment where people had to encounter these facts in everyday life at the supermarket. And it was just one, I believe, 72-year-old retiree who saw the label and was outraged about it. She says, you know, like, my son went to an art school and there's no way that an art school could hold that many people. And our Russian boys would never do anything that bad. So I knew that it was propaganda. And I read through her whole testimony in court, and it's like kind of a classic Karen situation, you know, calls the security guard. The security guard doesn't get mad about this. So she gets even more angry. She goes to the cashier. The cashier is like, refuses to take it seriously. She says like, I need to speak to the manager. The manager doesn't show up. So she takes home the labels herself, calls the authorities. And that's what led this artist to be punished for 7 years. I mean, just a single person getting angry, and under the way this law is persecuted, I mean, her testimony is all about the psychic anguish faced with this information caused her. And that's like the testimony, a part of what led the punishment to be so harsh.
There's a striking photograph of the trial, and she's, you know, in that like classic Russian bar box, but she's laughing. And, you know, when you describe the testimony of that woman, it's like the desperate laughter that would have like begotten from her, perhaps. You know?
Her girlfriend talks about how funny it was, you know, that she was surrounded by like 6 guards. Like she was just such a threat to the state. And in some ways, it speaks of this kind of like frantic attempt to crack down on dissent.
100%. I mean, it really speaks to the power of their propaganda as well, that this lady, her entire reality is shaped around what the Russian government is disseminating. And this artist, her act may be small, but she's a truth teller, and she's a big threat, of course, to that facade of propaganda.
Yeah, although I do think the reaction of the pensioner to this artwork does remind you, I mean, people inside Russia get very different experience of the news than we do outside of it. And the war is quite popular in Russia. It did take some grit to be a dissenter in that context. These are people who are pretty marginal to the conversation and marginalized. I mean, it's a very, in some ways, a private gesture, but that's because even at that early stage of the war, like dissent had been really pushed into these private spaces.
For sure. Well, we have a curious juxtaposition with another public persona in the news. I mean, there's no smooth way to transition there because Banksy is a political artist, but the stakes are obviously much lower than that. However, he has been very busy this summer. Incredible, like, what is it, 9 artworks, Min? That in total?
9 artworks.
In 9 days?
I believe we called it an art spree in the...
Yeah, a zoological spree. There were 9. I'm going to fail as I try to name all of them, but there were elephants, a goat, monkeys... a gorilla, rhinoceros.
Piranhas? I mean, let's not forget the piranhas that he left on a police box.
Yep.
So like over the course of 9 days, Banksy revealed progressively each day a different mural. There was like elephants touching trunks between 2 boarded up windows. There was monkeys hanging around an underpass. There was a wolf on a satellite dish, you know, howling at the quote unquote moon, I guess. Pelicans eating outside of a fish bar. A big cat stretching on a billboard. There was the piranhas, as you mentioned, on a police booth, and there was a rhino mounting a car. The ultimate work was this gorilla. And then it was kind of like revealed. It was like, oh, it's like all these animals have been released from the London Zoo because this gorilla is like lifting up a pull down thing and then all the animals are escaping. So it's like Noah's Ark in reverse or something. What do you guys make of this? I mean, this was obviously a big news moment. When Banksy does stuff, it always makes headlines as soon as it's verified on his Instagram account. At the same time, though, I feel like there was some more hesitation this time around from people.
I thought it was fun, and I enjoyed waking up every morning to a new Banksy. What animal is he going to paint today? I know there was a lot of criticism about how this work is basic and kind of not up to the Banksy standard, I guess. But although
which we should talk about. Like, what is the Banksy standard?
I mean, I'm curious as well. Like, what were people expecting of Banksy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess something, tartar, something more clever.
I think that the thing for me is that in the past, his works have usually had a pretty precise political commentary that's always been witty, if of sometimes a bit cliche, like always witty and always sort of like current. And I think that what was so different about this one is that it caused so much speculation. Like no one knows what the work is about. And some of the theories became, oh, it's about the human race on a precipice, or like, it's about animal rights. And then with the goat, some people said looked like a Palestinian mountain goat. So it was like maybe also about the war in Gaza. I mean, there was just so many different interpretations of the piece. And then some people said it was about the UK race riots, which like I really don't see. And so that was
why
maybe
9 days?
Where I thought that it wasn't so successful, because I think it just confused people.
We can't put that on Banksy. I mean, his Pest Control Office, which is the organization that authenticates his work, a spokesperson has said the works are really just to cheer people up and people are overthinking it. Yeah. They said the theorizing has been way too involved and people should just take them as they are.
I mean, it's like Banksy, it's 2024. Like, people go crazy on the internet. Like, you can't give anyone an inch.
I think that he's a bit here a victim of high expectations that he set for himself. I guess I think of his New York residency from some years ago. I mean, I think maybe over a decade ago now, when he did a series of artworks all over New York, which were pretty clever. I mean, there's a famous one where he sold Banksy stencils in Central Park, and they were real Banksy stencils. So the people who bought them got this bonanza, but you had to like realize that that was what was going on. And he managed to create like this whole media event where people were anticipating what was next. Which angle is he going to come at this? I think people kind of like think of him through that lens. He's pulled off these incredible things. I mean, he went to the West Bank very famously to do Palestine solidarity art at a certain point. I mean, he's done very consequential, very clever things, in my opinion. I don't know if that like harms my cred as an art critic, but I have a soft spot for him at his best. I think if you take it for what it is, which is clever and impactful in the street sense, not in the gallery sense, but it works where it's meant to be, he's capable of some great things. This is like definitely like minor Banksy. This is like him blowing off steam, but it's just there's such a media cult expectation around him. This is not him hiding a shredder in one of his works of art and having it go off at the climax of a sale, which is one of my absolute favorite art news stories of all time.
Banksy, that one.
Yeah. This is just literally like back to your roots. I'm the stencils guy. I mean, he is very influenced by a French street artist named Black Lerat, who is known for stencils of rats. So to me, it's like these stencils of all these different animals is like kind of him going back to his roots.
Maybe it was just inopportune timing then with the race riots that were happening in the UK. I'm sure that there's a lot of involved planning in these nighttime operations that they do around a city that is as populated as London with cameras everywhere. Maybe it would have like been better if he'd like push it off a few weeks or something, because I think that's where like people were trying to read it with this serious undertone that, as you said, Min, maybe it was just meant to be uplifting.
Did it coincide exactly with the race riots?
Yeah, it did. Or could his non-political statement be a political statement? Think about it.
I'm curious what you guys think about the stencils themselves, because that was something else that people were talking about, was that they were a little bit simpler than some of his other works.
Again, I think it's going back to basics, but I still think it captures the element of Banksy where his work interacts with the urban architecture and it offers people a new way of seeing their urban environment, which is, again, a thing I love about Banksy. I'm not a fan. I just like him, I think, a normal amount. And, you know,
like him a normal amount. That's a great way to say it.
Exactly. And
That's a great way to say it. I like Banksy a normal amount too.
I like it, yeah, exactly. And that's one part of his work that I enjoy. You know, it's street art. You should bring joy and surprise to someone who's just walking the street.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's interesting. I mean, the exact intersection with these explosive and very, very scary riots in the UK, that's something I hadn't thought about a lot. And I think that's something to consider because when you work in public, I think what's going on in public is pretty important in terms of the context, how you read these things. And I mean, he just was in the news with a much more, I think, pointed artwork. You know, earlier this year at Glastonbury, there was a concert, and then as a sort of guerrilla intervention, he had this refugee boat, an inflatable raft of sculptures of sort of migrants that went up so that people were like holding it aloft, and it became kind of a media event. Politicians commented it on, so on. That's something that I admire about the guy. I mean, he actually funds a migrant rescue boat with the proceeds of his art. And I'm like, people criticize him. I'm like, well, what have you done for migrants in the Mediterranean? So I guess it's reasonable, given that people would expect these artworks to be responding to the news cycle.
Yeah. I'm excited still to see what he'll do next. I mean, perhaps he'll take some of this online commentary into consideration for future projects. Do you have a favorite project, Min, of Banksy's? I'm curious.
The shredded girl with balloon. I mean, that's peak Banksy for me.
Yeah, that really was a good work. Maybe it's from where we're sitting, though, because it was just such a good commentary on the art market.
Wonderful critique and so provocative.
I know people debate whether it was staged, you know, this artwork, but I think it's incredibly funny either way, because either this artwork with a shredder in it got into the auction and they denied that they knew about it. So either they're like secretly collaborating with the artist and are lying to their clients who got ready to pay for this thing, in which case the auction house looks pretty silly, or he actually did, which is what I actually tend to think, he actually did sneak this shredder device into the auction and pulled this off, in which case them saying that they didn't know it was there tells you a very important piece of data about what kind of diligence they do on their artworks coming to the auction house. So yeah, in a sort of meta way is what it tells you about the auction world, which is where we started this conversation with dodgy auctions, right? It tells you something, and also it's just, what a good gag. You know, at his best, he's a great joke teller with graphic flair and, you know, and I think authentic anarchist guy sense of politics that at its best, I admire a lot.
For sure. Yeah, Banksy, if you're listening, Min, Ben, and Kate from Artnet like you a normal amount.
Nothing more. Nothing more.
Oh, well, I'm sure it'll be continued. There'll be something else on Instagram next week from him. So this has been fun and very interesting. It's been interesting to hear your guys' takes this month. And yeah, that's it for this week's episode. So thanks for joining me today, Ben and Min.
So nice to see you, Kate.
Thanks for having me. We should do this again. It was fun.
So that's it for this week's episode. If you like what you heard, you could subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, take a moment to rate and review us. It will help other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili and Carolyn Goldstein. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.